Let's start with the show. What is your nature? What was the spark for that work, and why now in terms of exhibiting for the first time?
It's not the first time I've exhibited,
Oh, right.
by any means, but Your Nature was kind of an appeal to the public in a way to have a look at the nature on their doorsteps. Because I have a belief that if you don't have an engagement with your immediate environment, you don't really you won't take on the bigger picture. So it's nice for people to see the majesty, the glory of the immediate nature that they've got access to if they really care to look and take the time. So Your Nature, to preserve an ephemeral state, was an appeal to people to have a look at their locality, to have a look at their nature, and have that urge to think, wow, this is special, I really would like to care for it, to preserve it. And always with my nature photography, I'm looking to kind of put a slant on it and make it almost as beautiful as possible. Yeah, because we're so used to seeing exotic wildlife, aren't we? And wildlife that's kind of alien to our everyday. And it'd be much easier for me to go over to, I don't know, Africa or something to photograph exotic animals, and people go, wow, look at that, But to find that nature on your doorstep and to give it a beauty that resonates with people, that would hopefully engage them, to have a look at their own nature and thinking, wow, that is there. There's something there to preserve. So it's such a difficult thing to get people to engage with. There's so many things distracting people from engagement with their environment now. There's phones, tablets, social media. Children are barely leaving their houses to explore the countryside. And as a child growing up, I had unfettered access to the countryside. It wasn't governed in any kind of way. So I was perpetually exploring the woods, the rivers, the fields with my brothers. And as a child, I remember getting those kind of almost meditative moments, around nature. If I was ever feeling unsettled by something, I would immediately take myself down to the river and feel myself slipping into this state of mind, which was just taken away from stress, woes or worries or whatever that was going on at the time. And I think that's very much what has made me come round to this exhibition, Your Nature.
So that was a interesting format, one night only.
It was one night only.
You had some support from sponsors.
Davis Colour sponsored the exhibition. Wales Wildlife Trust, I donated 5% to them and 5% to Friends of the Earth Cymru.
Great. And Jacob's Market was the venue for the evening show. Yeah.
There was absolutely no point doing it for longer than one night in a venue like Jacob's Market because it has no footfall. So for me to have been in attendance for a whole month or even a week or 2 weeks at somewhere like Jacob's Market would have been such a big time drain. So I thought, make it a one-night thing. The space is a lovely space, but to get those venues in Cardiff to exhibit photography, which has the footfall, which has attendance, is a very difficult thing to get hold of against cost. The cost of Jacob's Market for one night was reasonable. They were set up for card sales, which was very convenient. Whereas to get that elsewhere in Cardiff, very, very difficult to do because selling photography or art in Wales is not an easy thing to do. And there's not many pop-up spaces. The whole pop-up culture is becoming more prevalent. You've got places like Arcade, Cardiff and things, and there's a few new venues, but they're not prolific considering we're a capital city. Whereas Jacob's Market, it just seemed just the right space. It's a shame that you couldn't get to make it, but it was a nice little bar space outside the main exhibiting space, and I put up 25 prints. And but the amazing thing about the exhibition was it reminded me how people really engage with the physical print. So much more so than seeing it on a computer or seeing it on a tablet or seeing it on a phone. They were printed on this beautiful Hanamula bamboo fine art paper, sustainably sourced, which was very important to me, especially considering I was promoting Friends of the Earth Cymru and Wales Wildlife Trust at the same time. And the public that came, they were just wowed by the physicality of the print. It's got a beautiful matte finish, the paper. I mean, I've got them in the other room, and it would have been nice to show you. But and I've exhibited other works in the past and done lots of direct sales to the public, but in different forms of art. I've been self-employed within the arts ever since I left art college. And it's this year, I think it's really, next year, it's taken me back to that sense where I think I really need to go out and do more direct sales. Whether they're art fairs or designer craft fairs. Definitely try to avoid the craft fair aspect. But on
that point, how did because you have recently did the market down by the Riverside
Market.
Yes.
It was called off last Sunday actually because of the weather. It was blowing a total hoolie, wasn't it? And it was. But we're doing it this Sunday and the following Sunday afterwards. We did it last year as under the banner of the Roundhouse Partnership, and that's our partnership is 17 people who have land, and we're doing sustainable agricultural practice. We also have 6.5 acres of woodland where we're meant to be doing a woodland forest garden. So that's a bunch of people that bought shares in those pieces of land, and there's artists involved, there's environmentalists involved. And so we have a stand called the Roundhouse Partnership, which we did for the first time last year at the Riverside Market, simply to raise funds for the Roundhouse Partnership. So 25% of the sales of my prints will go to the Roundhouse Partnership.
Great. And how has that, what was the reaction? I mean, we're just recording this in early December, so obviously Christmas presents and impulse purchases, I guess, are uppermost in people's mind. But in that mix of other stalls that are on those markets, how have those print sales and cards gone?
Christmas-wise, people are looking for something a bit different, a bit accessible. And my small prints, price-wise, they're very accessible. I'm not here to do sales by any means.
Go on, pump it, Nigel.
Well, I've always believed as a business person, you at least try to work out 100% margin for yourself, which is not unreasonable by any means. And the print sales of the small prints, they're £14 a piece. They're on a backing card, they're wrapped up. It's an extremely accessible price. And for somewhere like the Riverside Market, people aren't going down there with rucks of money. Generally they're looking to buy food or the odd gift item. And the prints really went well last year.
It would be interesting to get your take. We've had this discussion recently with someone, and I think it's part of a bigger discussion about good photography, high quality photography, being made accessible at an attractive price. But we're a picky bunch, artists and photographers, and the way that work is displayed beyond the mount, the temptation is to frame it the way you want it framed, and then of course put that up for sale. And of course that by the time you're trying to reclaw those costs, it puts many people off. So selling just in mounts or a matted frame print, are you finding that successful? Is that the route forward for you?
Well, with the Your Nature exhibition, the prints were £65. And they were released A1 size on and a very good paper. That's not a big price for that kind of print. If I was to put a frame on it, you would be talking at least another £60 on top of that. So, if you were to put that on a gallery, you're looking to add another 40-60%. So, your end cost to the customer is somewhere between £250, £300 a picture. Whereas to go to an exhibition where I simply bulldog clipped them, displayed them very graphically, I'm from a typography graphics background. We set the show up in the day. It looked, I was very pleased with how it looked. But I've done lots of exhibitions in the past, so that wasn't alien to me whatsoever. But it was a big consideration to make that price accessible. I made 17 sales that evening. Wow.
And you had a great turnout by the looks of the social media reaction.
A very good turnout. But interestingly, it was mostly my Facebook social media side of things that I had the turnout from. There was a few people on Twitter that came along. One chap came all the way from Pontypridd, which was lovely for a one-night show. I was very flattered by that. But interestingly enough, there was a lot of my friendship support that came from it. I put flyers out all over Cardiff in hotels and and cafes, and because I think you're a fool to rely just on social media. The traditional ways of marketing, should not be neglected. So I did that as well. But I would say, 85% was through my Facebook friends as such that turned up. But again, it's that whole thing of when you exhibit something in context in an art gallery format, the engagement is just so different. People were wowed. Wow, I hadn't quite seen you work like this. It's a very, very different thing. And when I went to the printers to pick up the prints and to sign and edition them, I had the same response to the print because I hadn't seen my photographs printed on that kind of paper probably ever, actually, because I hadn't gone to that scale or to that quality of paper as yet. And I was wowed by them. It's just not the same on a screen. It's that classic thing, isn't it, of photo albums. Your engagement with photo albums, rather than looking at things on a computer, is so different. My dad was a keen photographer, and we were forever poring over photos in the albums. And whenever we go back home, one of the first things you did was get out the family album and have a laugh and have a nosy at them. But nobody keeps those albums anymore. It's a great shame.
So that early, I guess, defining period in your life, that growing up in Builth, did you follow your father in terms of the photography then, or was it the art side that kicked in for you first?
It was the art side that kicked in first. At the age of 10, I won an art competition. It was the Eisteddfod art competition. And I was always chosen to do the schoolboy displays for painting and pictures and stuff like that. So like any kid, when you're getting patted on the back for doing something well, you respond to it. And from that age of 10 onwards, all I ever envisaged myself doing was creating or doing art. And that is pretty much all I ever did, sometimes at the expense of the other areas. I applied to do a foundation at 16 in Cardiff because my brothers had left. I felt quite mature at that age because we had so much freedom, and somewhere like Builth, you didn't just socialise with your own age group. You were in the pub at a young age, communicating with all sorts of age groups. So it was quite an education in somewhere like rural Wales, market towns. There's a real community sort of parenting that went on. So you spent a lot of time with large age groups, different age groups, and so by the time I was 16, I felt ready to leave. And somewhere like Builth becomes a bit of a microcosm also as well, because you can't fart basically without somebody knowing what you've been up to. So I applied to Cardiff at 16, but they wouldn't take applicants until they were 17, but nobody told me I could have done a 2-year BTEC in Swansea, within arts at the age of 16, because the kind of arts education, again, of someone like Bill wasn't particularly comprehensive by any means. And so I ended up by hanging out for 2 years till I was 18, until I could get onto the foundation in Cardiff.
Where was that based at the
Howard
time?
Gardens at the time.
Right, the old site, yeah.
Yeah, it was the old site. But a very fine art foundation. And to be released into that atmosphere for the first time after Bilth, I had an amazing year. My first year in Cardiff, it was just absolutely brilliant. But the trouble is, with that 1-year foundation, we all know there's so many different aspects to art. And to try and work out within that first 6 months what area you want to specialise in, because the first division is between fine art and graphics. So, I mean, the trouble is, at the time, I felt as though I had to justify my arts vocation. I mean, my family was very science medical background, so I kind of felt as though I had to justify or fund at least what I was doing, even though in those days you had a full grant, amazingly lucky. So I ended up by doing graphics. Not that I was disinterested in graphics. I really appreciate design. And I hadn't fully thought about the fact that also within graphics, there was photography. And by then I had my own camera. I had a Pentax P30 at the time. But photography wasn't my mainstay. It wasn't. My portfolio that got me into my foundation was very much an illustrative fine art painting portfolio. Quite wacky, quite experimental. But I think someone like Cardiff, especially Howard Gardens, was looking for those kind of portfolios at the time. They weren't looking for the very illustrative, tight aspects of art.
Well, foundation is very much about experimentation, isn't it?
Well, foundation is about ripping apart your education up to that point. So much of our creativity is removed from us within the traditional education of O-level, A-level. Your foundation is about stripping that back down and getting you to almost rediscover your nurture your nature type art expression. My children are very creative. I don't intervene whatsoever to educate what they're doing, because I love their freedom. So many people try to recapture their naive art, later on in life. Why take it away in the first place? That's what I wonder about sometimes.
So what was the prompt then, starting at Howard Gardens, to buy that first camera? Was that to inform some of your sketchbook?
I had it before.
Right.
I had it before I went to foundation. It was simply to document and record my wanderings in mid Wales.
Right.
I didn't use it enough, I don't think, at the time. But I think, again, it's with the influence of my father and seeing his portraiture of us as children. That's where the kind of urge to photograph people came from. The nature side, very much more my upbringing within that environment. But then my foundation then took me to graphics, and I ended up in Exeter, and I did a 3-year degree in Exeter, but it was photography, illustration, typography in your first year, and then you specialised in the second year. So I then did that commercial choice. I chose typography as my specialisation in the second year. But in the first year, you learned black and white printing, you learned colour printing within photography. And the photography side of it appealed to me loads more than the typography side did. And so did the illustration side appeal to me a lot more than the typography side. But still, I went down the typography side, which was slightly mad. But it was that kind of, I don't know, having to justify your education almost.
So you had that commercial spark in the back of your mind?
It was
about what you were going to come out of, emerge as.
I wouldn't necessarily say it was a commercial spark. It was more an obligation, more of a justification of what I was doing to my family that you could actually make money out of being an artist. So it was a compromise. If I'd been true to myself at the time, I possibly would have done fine art at that age and gone down the fine art avenue. And possibly if I'd then gone on to do a fine art degree, I possibly would have ended up in fine art photography, retrospectively. So I did the 3-year degree down there, and the tutors, I'm sorry, it was just, so divorced from, the actual marketplace. And you would always get so much more from visiting lecturers or the 3rd-year students that you socialised with, seeing what they were doing. There was so much more to be got there.
And sometimes the technicians.
And often the technicians. But typography in Exeter was extremely traditional, which was a fantastic education in itself. And I wouldn't take away any of that because, I have a good design sense. The publicity for my show recently, that was designed by myself. And, I wouldn't be able to do that unless it had been for that education.
So were you getting hands-on with letterpress?
Yes.
The old ways?
Hot metal press. Yeah, absolutely. Physical type.
Has that informed or any stirrings in your loins to look at analogue photography? Or do you do analogue photography?
No.
Do you shoot film?
No.
Any interest at all?
Not at all. Mainly, again, on my first year in my degree, when we did photography, I hated the darkroom, hated chemicals, hated being enclosed in that space with that heavy scent. Now, some people really have an engagement with that. It didn't resonate with me whatsoever. I like open spaces. I like being out taking photographs. I appreciate the kind of revealing of a print and to discover what you had there. But, especially retrospectively wise, environmentally wise, the whole film side of things and the chemical side of things, possibly not a very great thing. That heady, chemically smell in a darkened room when the sun was shining outside didn't particularly appeal to me. I often think, actually, that, I would have been much better, like a lot of people, I would have been much better off doing my degree when I was about 27. I think people
appreciate it more.
Yeah, people do degrees too early, too young. It's too young to kind of realise what it is that really floats your boat. And I possibly would have made different decisions about what different areas of art to go into. But I came out with a good general design sense around illustration, typography and photography, which was all very useful later. And then went straight into self-employment, running a designer crafts business. I've always been a maker, a physical painter, as a part of that crafts business, we did greetings cards, and we ended up by becoming a greetings card publisher. Spent probably 6-7 years as a greetings card publisher. 2 of us from a terraced house in Canton ended up by being one of the biggest greetings card publishers in Wales. We had agents all over Britain. We exported to America and Australia. And we did a really good turnover, and that's what afforded us to buy a house, have a family, blah, blah, blah.
And what was the emphasis on the design or the subject matter of those cards? Handcrafted
children's illustrations, because my partner was a children's book illustrator. That's what she came out of her course with. And so she would do the designs, I did the business side. But then rapidly I became a business person. I was basically an accounts manager, procurement, sales, the whole caboodle. That involves selling anything, dealing with agents at night, keeping tabs on them. Basically an accounts manager. But it was a necessity at the time, to make money. And it did make us, a tidy enough amount to be able to buy a house in Canton. But luckily it was in that period where house prices hadn't gone sky high, and the chapter effect hadn't happened on Canton quite as yet, which it did very rapidly after we bought our first house there. But then we had our first child, and I didn't want to be a businessman. I'd put my creativity to one side, and also my partner that was then, we speculated that she would get a lot more work from the children's book stuff. So we dropped that business on its best ever turnover. I chose to drop it on its best ever turnover, because if we'd taken it to the next year, we possibly could have lost a lot of that profit, because we weren't putting enough into that business to keep it rolling as such. Made an executive decision for us both to focus, one, on the family, and two, so she could explore the children's book side of things. Which did. She got a brilliant contract after that with really good advances. And then I did the full-time parenting for 4 years, I think, which, I willingly did, because I never wanted to have children to do that farming out aspect of things. I didn't see a lot of my father as a child. I saw a lot more of my mum, because he was always out on call, the old school GPs that really did do a virtual 7-day week, on call every hour. It's not about you, is it, full-time parenting? It's purely about the children. Ideally, it should be about your lovely engagement and all the rest of it, and I would not take anything away from that. I wouldn't change it for the world, but...
so how often was the camera picked up during that?
That's when the camera came back into it, and I've heard this said before from other people, and...
it happened with me.
Yeah, it was almost that, it took me back to when my dad's big part of his engagement was filming us on his cine camera, and also taking photographs of us. And, he had a light meter, a handheld light meter and all the works, So that's when the camera came back in. And I would do really short 30-second videos of kind of those moments of new motor skills and things like that of your child, and handheld filming. And it was, in some ways, I'd love to show those videos again, almost in an art context,
or stills from them.
But it was more the film I really liked, and not so much the stills. But yes, and then the still sides of photographing the children really brought me back to photography again, and it was my creative outlet to go alongside the full-time parenting that really brought me back to photography. And I hadn't pinpointed at that point which area of art I wanted to concentrate on or got the most out of. And I've always had that white paper phobia. You've got a blank piece of canvas in front of you, or a piece of white paper, and it's like that initial mark. What am I going to fill this space with? It's quite intimidating in some ways. And with photography, it just reminded me that, and also with the ability to post-edit these days on a computer, that white paper aspect was totally removed, which I really enjoyed. But again, during that period, I was also creating digital print work. I did 2 series, which I exhibited loads. One series was called One Seed. The other series was called To Earth, and it was very much the ephemeral moments of seeds and engagements and how they fell and how they moved. And I was making massive constructions in Photoshop of 700 layers. Great big, again printed on Halloween of fine art paper, digital print work, and I sold quite a lot of those pieces, and they were very well received.
What was the content? Was that illustrative or was that photography?
Initially photograph, macro photograph, and then taken into Photoshop and created layers. So it was very much the transition of seeds, the movements. I reconstructed the fall of a sycamore seed. in Photoshop, which was a bonkers thing to do. It probably would have been much easier to have filmed it, but it wouldn't have been the same thing. It was just a perfect column of a sycamore seed falling vertically down, which they don't do in nature. They wander all over the place, of course. It's that tweakability, that kind of... Oh, and I was using my old Mac at the time, which didn't have the same processing power as this one. And also, you'd move something a millimetre, and the pizza started going around. The colour wheel would start going round, and you could go away, have a fag, have a cup of tea, change your child's nappy, whatever. And so I quickly realised that it almost appealed too much to me in the way that I could lose myself in hours of just tweak. So I kind of went away from that because it was too exhaustive. Going back to the photography with the children, I became to appreciate. I loved the instantaneousness of photography, and that's where it really kicked back in to picking up the camera.
Now that's a nice link into then the other side of which I think is equally as nice in your portfolio is the social documentary work, particularly in this local area of Canton in South Wales. Are you comfortable with people in amongst crowds? Obviously, some of the work is around the activists and the
100% comfortable.
Yeah.
And the social documentary, especially the kind of the activist side of things, I don't really want to direct people into poses, positions, places. I much prefer being that fly in the wall. I love to try and spot those things that other people don't spot, those glances, those exchanges of looks. And there was a big part of that work where I'm looking to isolate the individual. Quite often I use a very shallow depth of field, with my 105 lens, quite often with those shoots, I wouldn't go above 2.8, because I just wanted to pluck out individuals and their place within that moment. It's that celebration of individuals that have come together over a cause because they believe in it strong enough to motivate themselves to get out of their houses, to go and say this is not right. So I became very interested in just that individual's actions, what drove them to be there. And quite often when you look at those photographs, personally, I get a sense of that individual person in that time and moment and why they were there.
But as a series, in terms of some of the work or the events that you have followed, you give that context, I think, as well, that we referred to earlier. It's funny, this context word came up yesterday as we were doing another interview. And it is so important, isn't it? An individual photograph plonked on a print on a wall is an aesthetic thing. It's fine. As part of a set or as a series, they become much stronger, don't they, in some ways? Hence is the temptation, I guess, to go into publishing work or exhibit, as you have done with the recent show.
I think the social documentary side of things, because I would like to do a lot more documentary style photography, but I want it to be very much tied into the social or environmental side of documentation.
Do you think that's been covered well enough in Wales? Strongly enough? Other than just the normal jobbing press PR guys grabbing an event?
Well, that is what generally happens, and trying to persuade the environmental organisations that quality, strong imagery can speak 1,000 words, especially when, again, social media eats imagery, it eats information. You're lucky if somebody skim reads an article or even reads it at all. So sometimes if you have a strong image, and maybe they call them memes these days, you put a few words over the top of that image, you can convey a message so much more concisely and quickly than trying to rely on a blog or the traditional written word. And it's persuading people, the environmental organisations, the third sector organisations, the charities, that when they get the budgets in the beginning, to allow for photography to be within that budget, because it's vital. It can do so much for the promotion of their organisations or their causes or what it is they're trying to engage the public in.
Are they listening?
Slowly, they are, and I'm getting more work down those avenues. And I had a conversation, was it about a year and a half ago, with the Gwent wildlife area. I won't mention any names, but and they were looking to do a project there. And they didn't get the funding until just recently, and I spoke to them again recently, and yes, they will want to sit down with me in the spring. And it's a 5-year project, and it's got a big fund, but that has to be mapped out. But it's the perfect kind of project for me, because it involves people, it involves nature, it involves the environment, and I'm really looking forward to that. But a lot of the times these things get discussed or muted, and they can take several years to come through. Slowly that idea is coming through, and it's interesting actually, because a few of the organisations, I've noticed that their comms officers, a couple of them are turning out to be photographers as well.
I think that's becoming more and more common.
Yes, I think it is, but I've been hugely disadvantaged in that sense, because you should be a Welsh speaker as well. Because a lot of those organisations want their Twitter, their Facebooks bilingually communicated. Completely fair enough, it was important for me when I promoted Your Nature that one side was Welsh, one side was English. I did the same when I ran the Canton Green Party campaign in 2011. All my newsletters were done both bilingually. That's how it should be done.
But it is probably time for a reflection, I think, in Wales, observing as a Scotsman. I think finding that perfect person in today's visual communication field, who is the perfect videographer, perfect blog writer, perfect stills photographer, perfect social media expert, they're few and far between, aren't they?
Well, it's a lot.
Is it time to rethink about the value of photography, the value of good video, the value of good writing as individuals, disciplines?
It is a lot of disciplines to cover. But interestingly, there are a lot of the disciplines that I have covered. I've done a lot of writing. I did all the writing for the political campaign that I did. I did a lot of writing on my Flickr account before I moved over to my website.
But if I asked you now, what would you say you were? What's your profession?
A photographer.
Right.
But which has been my downfall sometimes. I'm a photographer with an environmental, political agenda. Because I can't leave it alone. And I think sometimes I have not been commissioned, possibly, by a lot of the related organisations who are tied into the Welsh Government, because I'm too political. And this is a problem I have, again, with the organisations that are tied into the Welsh Government, maybe for funding. A lot of environmentalists have got their lips tied, because you've got
because they want the next gig.
Well, because you're protecting an income, whereas being independent, I can say what I like. I can use my imagery for what I like. I can associate it to any issue, drop it anywhere I like without any comeback apart from, I'm answerable to myself, or maybe I might lose out on a few jobs because I'm being too political.
So on that point, how flexible are you on giving up copyright on your images?
How flexible am I on giving up copyrights?
Because more and more, listening to some of the organisations and some of them I may recognise as well, and these comms officers we're talking about, some of the default positions increasingly is to own all that content.
I've not really come across it. It's not been an issue as such. I mean, initially when I was doing more voluntary work to build up a portfolio, I didn't mind giving over a couple of the images for people to use, as long as it was a charitable cause, as long as it was championing social causes or environmental causes. That wasn't an issue whatsoever.
But were you being explicit in terms of who owned that image? It's one thing to give use.
I would always look for a credit, of course. Whereas now, it's funny. Now the table's been turned, and I'm implicitly or just trying to make a living out of photography. Giving your photographs for free to people really kills the industry. Yeah, but it's extremely difficult for people trying to break into the marketplace.
I guess what I'm getting at, I completely agree. Something needs to happen. There needs to be some kind of catalyst to. If we can do it in Wales, I think all the better. But I think just that appreciation of the effort, the skill that can go into making a great photograph that makes someone want to use it. But it's one thing to agree use of an image. It's another, because there can be a perception with some of these organisations that image is now theirs to do freely what they will with it, whether it's on the web, whether it's print, whether it's a billboard poster.
It was recently somebody got in touch with me on Twitter from an organisation, a European organisation. I forget where in Europe they were based, but they wanted to use a photograph of mine from the Nantllesk open cast coal mining protest. And it was about...
Was that the one with the coffin?
Yes, it was the moratorium that they were heading towards on open cast coal mining. And they had an article on that, and he wanted to use one of my photographs. He said, yeah, we'll give you full credit, everything on the photograph. And I said to them, are you in a paid position yourself? Does the organisation have a structure of, a wage structure? And the answers were yes. Well, as a token gesture for that image, please pay me £40, much like you would do to license an image. Mm. And he just turned around and said, well, I'm afraid we haven't got the budget for that. I said, you can't have the image, And there did come a point where I did start to put my foot down and say, no, if you don't pay for that image, you can't use it. And, and you give them a duration of time which you can use it for. Yeah. But I refused to do that. Again, like I say, with the social documentation of local protests and all the rest of it, I really didn't mind those images being shared around, used by them. That's not an issue. It's when people are within a paid structure are making money out of that image, that is the issue. I've heard of quite a few photographers say that, actually, that, they have discovered, their images in various places, but they will only ever kick up a fuss if that image is actually making money for somebody else.
But it is polite to ask, isn't it? I think this is why I'm asking. It's polite to ask
it's more than
for
polite.
Multiple use.
It's more than polite to ask. They should bloody ask. It's, But again, the trouble is with recession and times of, we all know that, we are really still in a recession. The first thing that gets hit is the arts and design. I remember when I came out of college in 91, it was recession. Nobody within design was being paid Sweet FA. And desktop publishing had only just happened. Computers came in my second year in college. we were doing everything by hand. So people would make the most of what they had rather than pay for it. And it's very much the same with photography, and it's still happening now. You will see a lot of the environmental organisations making do with the photography that they do themselves.
Or the latest guys is heading towards the universities and giving the students live briefs, as they're called, which basically means get a job done for free and pick the best student work.
Yes, that is the other way to do it, or having photography competitions that relate to a current brief that they have, and they'll get loads of amateurs to send in photographs, and you waiver your rights to the photographs. And that's the other way to do it.
Do you obviously still have this passion for the arts? Do you keep sketchbooks still?
Sketchbooks? No, not at all. I mean, I loved life drawing.
Me too.
I absolutely loved it. And as soon as I got onto my my degree course, and it was probably 3/4 of the way through my foundation, I then spent the rest of that quarter of term in the life drawing room, drawing with a biro on, just art paper. And but a biro, because it goes back to that white paper thing. You couldn't rub it out, so it was almost that manic drawing, but then something would reveal itself, and you start to see the form and structure within the lines, and you start to emphasize those lines. And it was the same with my painting. I painted with acrylic and ink, and it was, you make the whole thing black with different colours, and then you draw back the colours, you rub it away, and you leave your true colours of black, and then you put the colours back on top. I've always preferred that kind of revealing of something, working that way, because it takes away the white page.
And I guess we were talking before we started, because I was going to ask about influences, but in terms of photography, you tend to get out there and do your own thing. You're not following a lot of other photographers.
No.
You've only recently taken an interest in Ffoton. Mind you, we've only been going a year. Can you see that changing, though? As you come across where your work is, your photography is used, where it's published, you must be aware of your peers in terms of doing similar
I think
work.
As much as anything, it's just that I've been too busy in my own world.
Right.
Too busy with what I've just been doing myself. I barely have time between looking after children and doing self-employment to be kind of heavily looking into other people's work. I am quite busy. I'm very busy on social media, whether that's good or bad. But again, it's about the cross-promotion between different organisations, which doesn't happen enough. I am beginning to look at other photographers more. I've been looking mostly at the Welsh photographers, and taken a lot more interest. I've created a Welsh photographers list on my Twitter site, because again, I really believe that fraternities need to promote each other. They need, especially in this age of social media, it's a very simple thing to do, is to create a list of your fraternity on Twitter, so you can dip into it and see what your fraternity is up to, so you can help each other, promote each other's work. It seems like an extremely logical thing to do for me. Because, again, on things like Facebook or Twitter, if you have that initial kind of promotion of, say, 2 or 3 retweets, immediately that goes out to their followers. So you stand a lot more chance for that word to be disseminated a bit further. So it's a very basic thing to do, and it's a good kind of household maintenance, housekeeping thing to do, is to keep lists of groups of people so that you know what each other are up to, and to promote what each other are up to. And yes, I will kind of journey through my lists at different points according to what I'm doing. And I might step out of my photography list for a while because I've got wrapped up in something else for a while. And yeah, there's some lovely work coming out of Welsh photography. I will dip into the imagery, and but again, as soon as I see it, I think, oh, that's nice, and then I think, oh God, am I going to end up by doing that myself? Because I've seen it and it's become an influence. And I still have that battle of, I don't want to be influenced by other people's work. It's a funny thing.
Any interest in going into, say, the universities to talk to a class around this genre of photography? That blend of environmental, nature, and documenting events, whether activist or support events around those themes.
What, as in visiting lecturers?
Yes, talking to the students.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to do that. I've no issue with doing that whatsoever. I think, practicing artists have got so much more to give to students than full-time lecturers. Controversial maybe, but I would completely advocate almost there not being full-time lecturers at all. I would rather that you have people who are trying to bridge the professional world after leaving their degree or MA or PhD, subsidising that bridging gap by then going back to their college where they had their education and feeding back into the new students, because it's current. It's so much more current. There's so much more enthusiasm for what people are doing when it's that young, fresh, invigorated, I want to take the world on. You've got so much more to give. I came across too many tutors that had been within that institution and they were sat on a wage packet and they were completely divorced from what was current. I don't think it's a great way to bring on new people into the workplace. There's a real disconnect there.
What would be your, having experienced it now recently yourself, taking that decision to go full-time photography? Any words of wisdom for the youngsters coming through, perhaps want to get into that field, particularly in the area that you are?
To make sure you got an identity, a very individual identity, because we all know that, every other person these days is a photographer. It's been said many a time. But you need your point of difference, and to be as honest to yourself as possible. Be honest to your passion. Find your passion. If you haven't found your passion, spend some more time finding it first, rather than throwing yourself into something that you don't believe in. Even if it means going off and getting a part-time job doing something completely different. Find your passion, find your honesty, find your integrity, find your point of difference, and I think that will come through in your work, finally. I can't honestly say that I've come across many photographers that do their work in the same way that I do. I'm not sure. Yes, there are environmental documentary photographers, but I don't think they use it as politically as I have. It's the voice behind the photographs. It's kind of different. And as yet, I've not been exhibited within the kind of work of, say, Diffusion Festival or things like that. My work has not been up. It doesn't quite fit that bill as yet. I need some more coherent documentary projects. I did some really interesting work recently, actually, up in Merthyr, up the North Gurnos. I was working for social sciences, the Cardiff and Bristol social science departments, and working with a poet, a writer, on the issues of isolation and loneliness up in the North Gurnos and the older generations. That was a fascinating project. It was a 6-week project, and we were up there a day a week for 6 weeks. And we were the front line of engagement on these issues, literally going into the community, engaging with the community and trying to discover narratives of isolation and loneliness.
And you were photographing?
I was photographing. We had a poet beside me and I had a writer beside me at the same time. So loaded with ethics, the whole project. It was incredible. It's going to be shown. It's going to be exhibited the 23rd of January at the Red House in Merthyr. But I have not got total control over that exhibition, which is kind of unusual because it's a mix of poetry, writing, and also the community's input, because it was about co-production. You're co-producing the narratives of isolation and loneliness. But I found myself, having these conversations with people for the first time of meeting them, whilst having to take their photograph. You're winning over the trust of these people to try to give you these narratives of isolation and loneliness whilst taking their photograph. That's a difficult engagement. And we went on a bus journey and we were almost expected to talk to people on the bus about these issues of isolation and loneliness. And I found myself, I couldn't do that. It just wasn't the right place. So I was just looking for metaphors from the bus window itself, with my 1.105 millimeter lens, and some quite nice shots came out of that. I quite liked them, and also I was looking for narrative. We went from the external landscape into the urban landscape, and then into the old people's home. So I was looking for narratives of isolation and loneliness in the external landscape, then looking for narratives of isolation and loneliness, what caused it within the urban landscape, and then looking to the results of that isolation and loneliness and narratives of that within the old people's home. So it's just continually responding to metaphors within the landscapes and the environments, to the contributors of what causes the breakdown of community at the end of the day. And Welsh market towns have suffered massively on the breakdown of community, purely because people have lack of employment, the death of the local high street, politics, cuts, out of town shopping. All these things have broken down community. And community doesn't really exist if you haven't got visible community. If you go into your local school and you walk there, if you go to your local high street and you walk there, you see people, don't you, on a regular basis. That's where community is built. It's that facial recognition, that pausing to stop to talk to people on a regular basis. A lot of what's happened in the name of economic growth is a breakdown of community. We don't see each other on a regular enough basis, accidentally,
So when you reflect on Build Wells, where you grew
absolutely. I mean, Build Wells, again, it had a vibrant high street when I was a young lad. And then when a supermarket came to Merthyr, my mum would drive 35 miles and do a big shop every 2 weeks rather than go to the local high street. And that has happened all over Wales.
So is Builth now a showcase town just in terms of the one big event annually?
The Royal Welsh Show has always been a big income for Builth, a seasonal income for Builth. But it used to survive in its own merits. It had 13 pubs. There's probably 3, 4 maybe now. It had 4 butchers, it had greengrocers, it had a toy shop, it had an ironmonger's, it had everything that you wanted on the local high street. But a lot of that has gone. Even though the population is shot up, development all around it, but it's a bit of a retirement place, like a lot of Welsh marketplaces. Cardiff is a massive drain on Wales. It's a massive drain on Wales because everybody feels as though they've got to come here to get educated or to get jobs, especially within the arts or media or, Cardiff, it's reflected within house prices. House prices in Cardiff keep going up. You look to Bridgend or anywhere else like that, all the house prices are in the opposite direction. Local economies need to be kept and preserved in these Welsh market towns. So people like myself, I would dearly love to live back in Bilf, bumble around that ecology with my camera, recording it, selling it, that would be my dream, and to see that river, its ecology restored to at least how it was when I was 7 years old. To go back to that and revisit that, it'd be beautiful, and that is what Wales should be. It should be all these lovely little macro economies, almost self-serving, having growth on their doorstep, having food grown on their doorstep, having their renewables, community energy, mixed combined renewables around each market town, supplying that town first, so that immediate community gets the benefit of it first, and then surplus goes to grid.
So how can your photography help that?
How can my photography help that?
Help or inform that change?
I generally try to, I think that's more the social media comms side of things, is promoting that aspect. And I've come around to the aspect where I don't support any one political party anymore. I've become probably apolitical, or politically neutral. And I will support any politician that's making the right noises in the right direction, because I think party politics is half our problem. It's that very short-term political stance. This is the good thing about the Future Generations Act. It's meant to transcend political terms. You've got this main backbone of principles that goes right through to the next generation, rather than it just changing completely every 5 years on political terms. I mean, sustainability is a word that's bandied around a lot, but I personally believe that if you haven't got environmental sustainability underpinning everything, you haven't got anything. Because if that is not, if your environment's not supporting you and has nothing left to give you, what are you left with? Nothing works, does it? The whole ethos of a circular economy is based on sustainability, the whole kind of repair industry, the recycle industry, but we're fixated with recycle. Well, we shouldn't be fixated with recycle. We should be fixated with repair and reduce,
So in amongst those aims and aspirations, I guess the upcoming, just ending on the Roundhouse sort of project, an initiative that you're involved in, that you mentioned earlier. Do you see that as an opportunity to build your own, is that your own studio, if you like?
It's completely been my own studio.
Yeah.
I mean, we instated 4 ponds into the barley field. When we bought the barley field, it was a compacted barley field. It was completely eroded, rain would run off it, clay soil, nothing there whatsoever. Now, since we've been managing it with agricultural sustainable principles, we've put ponds in because we needed water security there. We needed swales to distribute the water evenly so it just didn't run off the land. We've put hugel beets in. Hugel beet is compostable materials which you put the soil back on top of. It's good for small mammals and frogs and all the rest of it. We're doing wildflower reintroduction back into that field as well. When I first saw that field, I thought, I don't like this place. It's a total, wildlife desert. In comparison to the woodland, which it was in the Vale, they're 2 separate venues. And I loved the woodland because it already had a lot more there. But as we worked that barley field in the first year, put those ponds in, oh my God, watch that nature move back in. The dragonflies that came back in, the damselflies, the bees, the pollinators, the small mammals, they flooded back in, and it's that whole make a space for nature. You make a space for it and it clambers to get back in,
If you, have you listened to the Chris Tancock episode on Ffoton?
Yes, I did.
The two-parter.
Yeah.
I mean, he's made it his mission over the last 10 years or whatever to follow the Dowrog project, and just how that. Are we going to see that as a project from you, do you think, with the woodland areas, in terms of a following or tracking that change, or have you been doing that?
I've already been doing it. Yeah. I mean, I've made sure that I've kept separate albums in my work dedicated to the woodlands and the barley field. I think initially, what was it? The Ely paper mill site. I knew it was going to be developed down here in Canton, and this was back in 2011. That was another thing that brought me back to photography, was that campaign, actually, because I would go around and photograph what was wrong in the community and put it up on social media and go, you cannot deny this. This is a photograph.
So you were that pain in the arse then that would get in the face of councillors and
absolutely, yeah, I was, and I was patted on the back by my opposition and said, you ran a bloody good campaign considering we were nowhere at that stage. Anyway, and the paper mill site, the ecology was fantastic there. It was completely left. It was covered with buddleia and brambles and all sorts. It was left to go wild. And I went over there one day and photographed what was there in macro, and there was an abundance of stuff there. But I did it because I knew they were going to strip it all away and put it back to housing, which they're in the process of doing now on a floodplain. Anyway, and I think that's initially took me back to that kind of documenting what's to be lost, what's to be regained. And that's very much become a theme of the barley field and the woodlands. And it completely goes back to the rivers back in Bilf. What was lost, what's to be regained. You know, there's a project up at the Cambrians at the moment. They tried to crowdfund it. They're trying to buy a massive swathe of the Cambrians, which will go to forestry if they don't buy it. It's called Coitrian, and the idea is to rewild it and replant deciduous trees up there. And if you rewilded the whole of the Cambrians, if you reinstated all that mixed deciduous trees, that would basically sort out the ecology downstream, probably all the way down to Hereford. Yeah, it's that initial feed of those rivers. Yeah, it would help also to sort out some aspects of farming as well, but it would contribute a shed load to the Welsh economy to have that eco-tourist side of it. And, you know, places like Bilf originally were built on salmon fishing. Yeah, people would pay massive amounts of money to stay in those hotels and to take licenses for stretches of water, because it was such a good fishing river. That whole aspect of, what's been lost, what can you do to help regain it, and then document what's been moved back in, and showing what short periods of time these things happen over. It's incredible.
In terms of documentary type projects, it sounds from you that coming from the ecology, the environmental and the wildlife side, that Wales is still a rich hunting ground if we just look a bit more carefully for photography.
There is stuff there to be found, and obviously you're going to get a lot more from maybe the Wales Wildlife Trust reserves, where that proper management has been put into place. But again, you've only got to look at farming practice right over Wales, sheep farming, cattle farming, removal of hedges, the mechanisation of farming. If only farming was encouraged to be wildlife farming and farming for the good of, obviously, for food as well. The two need to be married a lot more. It would be lovely to have farmers to be able to diversify into renewable energy, to farming for nature and to farming for food. I think self-employed people need different revenue streams. It's a real vital component to self-employment. I've always been highly aware of it myself, not to rely on one stream, because one stream can drop off really easily and then you're left high and dry. Whereas if you've got 4 or 5 different streams all feeding into one income, it's a lot safer place to be within self-employment. That has so much to give in all aspects for Wales. But to get your imagery of good wildlife in Wales, you do tend to have to go to those reserves or something that you've created yourself. There's pockets everywhere, and it's how keen you are to look and how knowledgeable your eye is. I mean, all my photography that includes pollinators or wildflowers. I don't photograph cultivars. My pollinators are always on wildflowers because I want to promote the worth of the wildflower reinstatements of wildflower meadows. I'd love to bumble around all of the wildflower meadows in Wales and just document what's there in comparison to what's in the adjacent field that's just been mechanised for God knows how long. Nothing's left. We don't leave those little those margins, those hedgerows, those little wildlife corridors which are essential. I mean, in somewhere like Cardiff, we've got all these alleyways right around Cardiff that have barely been used for anything. Now envisage those alleyways as wildlife corridors or as green lungs. You would draw so much into your city to let those alleyways turn into little wildlife corridors. Really highly underrated aspect of what you could do. You could be growing food in those corridors. I've been involved with Cardiff Transition for a long time, and Farm Cardiff and things. Farm Cardiff has identified all those growing spaces, all those nature spaces that are potential within a city. There is so much there when you start looking that could be used for nature, that could be used for food growing, there's Orchard Cardiff as well, which is they've mapped all the fruit trees within Cardiff, and then in autumn they know all the fruit trees are. People are signed up and they say, come and collect my surplus fruit, and then that goes to Fair Share Cymru, and they distribute that food to people that haven't got access to that fruit, or almost in a food bank type style, and it would be a lot of the time it's completely wasted. There is so much you can do locally to encourage wildlife, but it's never top of political agenda to do that, because it's not about power, it's not about loads of money, but what it is about is sustainable community resilience, and that's hugely lacking.